All right. Evening, folks. Um, we finished chapter 4, Mishnah 7, uh, 2 weeks ago, and we're in really a series of um, Mishnayot that I would say are aimed more at rabbis than at the general populace of Jews, although not 100%. Um, but a lot of them have to deal with like how one is supposed to act as a judge, and it's important to recall that like classically, I believe I said this 2 weeks ago. Um, Classically, the function of a rabbi was to serve as a judge, um, not to serve as the Jewish version of a Christian minister, right? The, they rabbis did not preach sermons every week. They were not the ones who led services. They didn't represent, I mean, sometimes represented the Jewish community vis-a-vis the general community, but the general community at this time was who? The the Roman Empire. Um, not your Methodist neighbor next door. Um, and so and that was the role of the rabbi up until really very recently. I think really the late 1700s in places like the United States, Great Britain, Germany, probably a little later than that, like around 1810 or so. So, at any rate, um, let's just sort of jump in and have a look. Okay, so we're talking about Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei. And so we're looking starting at Mishnah 8. Hu Haya Omer, he used to say, Al Tehi Dan Yechidi, She'ain Dan Yechidi Ela Echad. Okay, do not judge alone, for none may judge alone save one. Okay, so um, let's look at the B part first and then the A part, right? So he's talking about acting like literally as a judge, okay? And remember that, I mean, again, Jewish law deals with everything. It deals with, what we would consider civil law, it deals with torts, deals with criminal law, at least in theory, although, there were not that many times in history where Jews could actually put Jewish criminal law into effect, right? And even at this time, really, because um, who was in charge of criminal law was the Romans. Um, but so when it says none may act as a judge alone except one, or let me see again how he translates it. Yeah, none may judge alone save one. What does that mean? Who is the one who may judge alone?
God.
God, right? Right. God doesn't need
Right.
any
They
additional
help.
members of the court, right? But only God can do that. Yeah, Alan.
Rabbi, if that's what it's supposed to mean, and that's how I would think it makes some sense, one should be capitalized.
I agree. I
Hmm.
agree with you.
Yeah.
I can't speak to the choices that they made. It could just be oversight. It could be the way they received it from Dr. Culp. Or it could be maybe to just to avoid like, telegraphing what this phrase means. But that's clearly what it means, right? I mean, God can judge solo, but you ain't God. You may think you're God, but you ain't. Um, and but why would the Mishnah think that it was wrong or a bad idea for uh, for there to be a solo judge sitting in judgment?
So because there's so many points of view that
Yeah. Isn't the bet din
yeah.
three judges?
Baked in is three judges. Yes, absolutely. Right. So no, so absolutely. I mean, this is still carried over into practice today. I mean, the reality is that, certainly in the non-Orthodox community, um, the times that a rabbi may be called to serve as a judge on a Beit Din, which means a religious court that deals with anything other than, personal status. I mean, I will tell you, come June, I will have been ordained 40 years, and I have never been involved in a Beit Din that dealt with anything other than marriage, divorce, or conversion. What we call personal status. Um, there is a place for it. For example, um, we are, you know, once we, God willing, sell the building, we will not have room for all of our Torah scrolls, and we are in the process of la- sending one as a permanent loan to a startup conservative synagogue
Mhm.
in Leipzig, Germany. And so I am drawing up the agreement. I mean, I will have to be approved by the board, but before I send it to the board, I will run it. Alan, forewarned is forearmed. I will be running it by you. Um, but one of the clauses in there will be that in the event of a dispute or disagreement, it will be resolved by a baked in of the conservative movement, which is perfectly legal. I mean, it's an arbitration. It's an alternative dispute resolution, and generally the courts don't care that the alternative dispute resolution is a religious court rather than you know a lawyer who does that for it. That's fine. But yes, so a baked in is always three. And the rationale behind it, as Toby said, is because there's different perspectives, right? And if you have like one judge who, for whatever reason, is going down the wrong path, um, I would say his. I mean, now we would say his or her, but back then his colleagues would maybe, call him back onto the straight and narrow. And I find it interesting. I don't know enough about, the history of the court system in the United States, but I find it interesting that that district courts, it's a single judge, but appeals courts are always multiples. And I think at the first appellate level is usually three, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I won't call you Your Honor because I'm thinking about court. But you're saying the district court, meaning the federal district court, and you're
Right,
right. But the federal district court, which in Maryland is our circuit court, it's the court of general jurisdiction.
right.
You do have a judge, and you may, if you want, appear just before that judge. But those courts also have provisions for juries. And so
Correct. Yeah.
that's certainly more than the one person.
Right, but I mean, where what are the cases like the one case that I've been following, pretty assiduously is Abrego Garcia versus Nome, right? And that's all been, Judge Zinnis. It haven't been
Yeah,
a
I've been
jury.
following that too, and I actually signed my name on a amicus that went to the court, and that the amicus just said we're not talking about Mr. Garcia, but the appropriate thing here is not to sue district court judges, and of course
Right.
it prevailed on that, but but at this point, and I don't even know that Garcia has gotten to the merits. I think he's only been it's just been preliminary motions back and forth.
Uh-huh. Okay, so I mean, in theory, it could eventually get to a
A jury,
situation
if
where
that's
they're,
appropriate, yeah.
yeah, okay. Because I mean, the federal courts have been extremely active the last year plus, and you never hear about juries. It's always either individual judges or appellate panels that are, making these rulings. So,
But when you come in before the court for a temporary restraining order or an injunction of any sort, that's just in front of a judicial officer, and
right.
then it, it's rare, although nobody will believe that. But then you take an immediate appeal to the Court of Appeals, and then they somehow can get on the shadow docket and go flying through the Supreme Court, whereas no other cases seem to be doing
Right.
that, but they do. And so, if you just read the media in the media or listen to the media, it's a very skewed it's a very skewed reality.
Interesting. So yeah, so appellate courts are normally, right, a panel of three, correct?
Either three, or you can have an en banc, which
And
means you
banc,
have
right, yeah,
everybody. Yeah,
right. But the
but
en banc would be
typically it's
a
three.
rehearing from a three-judge
Right.
panel, right? Yeah. Okay. So here, so Bacon is three, and it's always three. And the reason that it's three is so that you won't have a tie, right? I mean, you could have a 2-to-1 split, but you wouldn't, or you could have 3-0, but you wouldn't have a tie. You know, but anyway, so yeah, so the idea is that you should have three judges so that the chance that, I mean, obviously it's not impossible that all three could go down the wrong path, but it's less likely. um and then of course you would not have a tie. And even there is, and I have a habit of getting bogged down in tangents. So, I mean, why should I break that habit tonight? But there is one situation where there is a baked in of five rather than three.
Mm.
Um, and that's what's known as chalitza. Essentially, in the Torah, it's called levirate marriage. That is provision that if a man dies without having fathered a child, his surviving brother must marry the widow.
Mhm.
And then their first child would be legally the child of the deceased brother, so that the that family's property would not be alienated from the family. And already by the rabbinic period, they basically said, no, this is not like a good idea. This is not something that we want to encourage. Um, and so there's a whole ceremony that you can go through to because the woman can't marry anybody else. The woman cannot say, she doesn't have the right. So I don't want to marry. I don't want to marry this guy. Um, he can decline to marry her, but if so, there's a ceremony that he has to go through. And anyway, for that, it's a baked in of five rather than three, but two of the judges like sit to the side and don't participate. They're called Shtuma Dayanim, silent judges. Um, and that's all I know. I don't know the rationale or why. I honestly don't know. I mean, but I do know this fact. Yes, Sue.
Actually, something similar to that happened to my father's mother. Evidently, um, my my father's father was married to a lady, and they had a couple kids, and she died, and she had a sister who was not married. And she evidently had to marry him and raise his two kids and then had a couple others. So my dad had a sister and two half brothers in that arrangement.
Yeah, I mean that would have been like family pressure and like the family deciding that this is what should happen rather than like a halakhic requirement.
And this was over
Um,
in Russia where this
yeah,
happened.
no, I assume so. But what I'm
Mhm.
saying is that there's no like that's not a legal requirement. It's I've heard of situations like that before, right? And certainly, the family could have decided, this is what's going to happen because, the kids need a mother and blah 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 blah. So, but it's not. But in the case of the widow marrying the brother, that's actually in the Bible. But it's also it's basically it's not done anymore. I mean, it is not done anymore, and instead, they have this chalitza ceremony that releases her from the obligation to marry her brother-in-law. Okay, so let's go on. Va'altama kablu da'ati shehen resha'im. This is kind of vague. All right, do not say, accept my view, for they are free, but not you. Okay. This requires a lot of unpacking, but according to Bartanura, what's going on here is right. So okay, so two litigants come to me right, to settle a case. And I am aware, because I've studied the Mishnah, right, I am aware that I should not judge this as a solo judge. So I go out and I recruit two other rabbis to serve on the Beit Din with me. We hear the litigants, we retire to deliberate. The two judges that I've recruited want to find in favor of Shimon. I want to find in favor of Moshe. So I say to the other two judges, hey, look, this is my case originally. You guys have to accept my opinion. And the Mishnah says, no, 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 right? Quite the opposite. I mean, just because you recruited them to sit with you in a case that was originally brought to you doesn't give you authority to try and force them to accept your perspective. I mean, for two reasons. Reason number one is simply because you're outvoted. There's no senior and junior judges here. You're all three judges on an equal footing. And the other is like they're doing you a favor. They're doing you a favor, and then on top of the fact that they're doing you a favor, you're going to try and force them to accept your perspective, right? If that were the case, right? If it were the case that I could go to the other two judges, hey, my case originally, so you have to accept my perspective. Then the other two judges, it just becomes a pro forma thing, right? They're not really needed if it's if it's the one judge who, let's say, has the original jurisdiction, is always going to win. And here, I mean, I would say this gets to still be an issue even with Batei Din, with Beit Dins today, right? Because the main function of a Beit Din in non-Orthodox communities is to supervise conversions, right? I mean, occasionally, the only other thing that a Beit Din that I participated in has ever done is dealing with divorce. Now, the actual writing of a divorce is a specialty that you have to train for, that very few conservative rabbis are qualified, and it's one of the few situations where we actually have a hierarchy in conservative Judaism. If you are not trained and certified, as the term is Masader Gittin, if you're not certified as a Masader Gittin, you are not allowed to write a get or supervise a get. You're just not allowed, because the rules are very intricate, and the consequences of doing it improperly are very serious, right? Because if a couple is invalidly divorced, right, they wind up committing adultery, with their subsequent partner through no fault of their own. But that's the actual writing of the divorce. The delivery of the divorce, any rabbi can supervise, and the way it's generally done these days is by means of ages, for a couple of reasons. One is that because we only have a handful of rabbis who are qualified to do this, like Um, it's been a while since I had to deal with it, but at one point, like the nearest rabbi to DC who actually did this was in Philadelphia, right? So we weren't going to send, the couple up to Philadelphia, right? So what would happen is that the rabbi in Philadelphia would send forms to the rabbi down here, and the couple would sign them and so on and so forth, but that had to be done under the supervision of a baked in, and then you'd send it to Philadelphia, they'd write the get, and then it would come back. So, like, for example, um, my parents were divorced civilly for about 10 years when my dad got married to his second wife. And, they had never seen the need for a get. But when my dad was getting married and wanted me to officiate, and so you have to, I said, Dad, I can't officiate if you don't give mom a get. And he was like, fine. Um, and then I spoke to my mom, and my parents were not on good terms at all. And I said, Dad has to give you a get and you have to cooperate with it. And, and she said to me, I will do whatever you need me to do, provided I do not have to be in the same room with that man. And that no problem, right? So my dad who lived in Queens, he went to JTS where the baked in was. They wrote it. They sent it by FedEx to Rumson, New Jersey, near where my mom lived. She went into the rabbi's office, and it was fine. Um, but that's but anyway. So if you're dealing with conversion, it's common, although probably not best practice, for the rabbi who is like supervising and teaching the conversion student to be on the baked in, right? Why do I say it's not best practice? Because if I am sitting on a baked in for a conversion candidate that another rabbi has prepared, and I say I'm not willing to sign off on this conversion, it's not really a reflection on the candidate, right? It's a reflection on the rabbi. And it becomes, I mean, it's uncomfortable under the best of circumstances, but it's doubly uncomfortable if one of the other judges is the rabbi who prepared the candidate. That's really a conflict of interest,
But it
and
would be
although we do it all the
it's
time.
a conflict. But Rabbi, let me ask you this. When this was written, they were talking about all sorts of civil problems. I'm
Sure,
assuming that who owns this sheep and whether there's water rights or how often you can go here, or did you throw a stone that broke something, that kind of stuff.
sure.
And what bothers me, or what I don't understand, I should say, is that the text says you can't do this because they are free and you are not. That's got to be in context that I'm missing somewhere. You're all
Yeah,
free or you're
it's
all
not.
not
I
free.
mean,
You got to
right,
follow the halachic law.
right.
Why does
No,
it say
I
it
mean,
that way?
free is not a good translation.
Right.
Okay, the word is rashai, which means permitted.
All right.
Okay, in other words, they are permitted to put pressure on you, not the other way around. I think is a better translation. Um, but I mean, it seems to like your question assumes that the decision would be cut and dry, and it's not. I mean, look, the law is the law, right? But and obviously in a jury trial, right? So the jury is instructed that, you are the trier of facts. The judge is the one who decides the law, right? Um, but so the question is, what are the facts and what is the law? But even like obviously, even if the law seems to be straightforward, obviously different judges understand it differently, right? And that is no different in halakha than it is in civil or criminal law, common law, whatever. I mean, different judges, see the application differently. All right, let's go on. Rabbi Yonatan Omer, Rabbi Jonathan said, Kol hamikayem et haTorah me'oni, sofo lekaima me'osher. Okay, and so again, its translation is not that it's not exact, it's not as intelligible as it could be. All right, so Rabbi Jonathan said, whoever fulfills the Torah while they are poor will eventually come to fulfill it while they are wealthy. V'chol hamivatel et Torah me'osher, sofo levatla me'oni. But anyone who discards the Torah or fails to fulfill the Torah, nullifies the Torah while they are wealthy, will eventually come to discard or nullify the Torah while they are poor. Right? I mean, this to me, frankly, is more kind of supernatural, right? Like that God rewards us or punishes us based on our fulfillment or neglect of the Torah, which I believe, but this Mishnah only makes sense, I think, if God does that in this world, as opposed to in the world to come, right? And I would say, all evidence indicates that God does not do that in this world, right? But that's what this is saying, right? That if you observe the Torah while you're poor, God will give you wealth and you will continue to observe it. But if you neglect the Torah while you're wealthy, God will take away your wealth and you'll have the opportunity to neglect it while you're poor.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
are we
now,
talking about material wealth only?
I believe so. I believe that. Right. I mean, sure, if you want to view these terms as spiritual rather than material, um, I just I have not seen them used in that way. Um, but it could be. I mean, certainly, right? I mean, understanding it as spiritual rather than material, um, is more edifying or at least corresponds more accurately to, the way the world seems to actually operate. And we'll see. I mean, in the subsequent Mishnah, not too far down the road, it says exactly that. We have no explanation for, the the fact that righteous people suffer and wicked people prosper, right? So again, um, a um, the Mishnah does not represent a unitary perspective, right? It represents, a lot of different perspectives, which is why these are all brought in somebody's name rather than as simply a you know ex cathedra statement. Um, and as an obiter dicta. Um, and they're aware of the reality. I mean, I think in many ways, I mean, remember that from Moses to these guys is roughly the same amount of time as from these guys to us, right? So, and I think in some ways their mindset is actually closer to ours than it is to Moses's. I mean, the Roman, right? I mean, hell, the Greco-Roman world was intellectually, in many ways, quite similar to ours, right? And in other ways too. I mean, they were urban and had divisions of labor and so on and so forth. International trade, people were multilingual. Um, so anyway, any questions or comments on this? If not, we'll go on. Okay. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir says or said, Have mima'et ba'esek v'asok b'Torah. So Rabbi Meir said, engage very little in business and busy yourself with the Torah. Right? I mean, in other words, Rabbi Meir said, look, I know that you got to go to work, right? I know that you got to, have your store or, be a craftsman or, a cattle dealer or, whatever it is that you do to make a living. I understand that, but you should do that as little as possible and spend as much time as possible studying Torah. I mean, and I think what Rabbi Meir is not saying that these other occupations are bad. They're not bad, but they're instrumental, right? They're instrumental, right? You have to make a living, right? Fine, you have to make a living, but God did not put you on earth to be a cattle dealer or a silversmith or whatever. God put you on earth to study the Torah and fulfill the Torah. So however much time you need to spend in your day job to provide for yourself and provide for your family, yes, absolutely do it. But that's not the main reason why you're here.
So,
Yeah,
Rabbi,
yeah.
this is directed more at the populace in general, and not just to the priests, the rabbis.
I mean, to people in general, I think, but I mean, remember, right? Remember 2 weeks ago we were studying that one should not make teaching Torah your source of income, right? And up until very recently, um, rabbis, when I say very recently, I don't mean like, last Wednesday, but 200 years ago, um, rabbis had day jobs. Okay, and now it depends on the city and so on and so. There were many places where yes, the rabbi had a day job, but the community set it up like, okay, so the rabbi might also be a tavern keeper, let's say, and then the community would say nobody else is allowed to have a tavern in our town, only the rabbi, right? So that way, like, yeah, the rabbi would be a tavern keeper, but by having a monopoly, he would either make a nice living or be able to make a living without putting in like an inordinate amount of time spent running his tavern. Um, so yeah, I think it's more aimed at rabbis than anybody else, but everybody is supposed to learn. I mean, not just rabbis. Um, yeah,
I don't want
Alan.
to monopolize this, but this is written during the Roman occupation, in the days when they still had the temple. So there
No,
were
this is
offerings.
this is mostly subsequent to the destruction of the temple.
Okay, that makes so that's why they need their job. And
Yeah.
yeah, all right.
All right. No, but rabbis and priests are not the same group of people. Um, at all. I mean, they could be, but I mean, that's just by chance. I mean, a rabbi happened to be a Kohen or a Kohen happened to be a rabbi. But, well, actually, I mean, that's also in one of the Mishnayot that's coming up. All right. The Haveh Shafal Ruach Bifnei Kol Adam, uh, be humble towards everybody that you meet. The im batalta min haTorah yesh lecha b'telim harbe hanegda. If you have neglected the Torah, you shall have many who bring you to neglect it. Right? You'll have plenty of friends helping you to spend your time in frivolous occupation. The ima malta b'Torah, but if you have toiled in the Torah, yesh lo schar habe li ten lecha. If you have toiled in the Torah, that is to say, the Torah has much reward to give to you, right? The Torah will give you reward if you study. And here I do think it's spiritual and not material. The reward that the Torah is giving you is not it's not material things. It's spiritual riches,
So
right? But the idea that I mean, we saw this a few weeks ago, right? Avera goreret avera, one sin literally draws after it another sin, right? Which is true, right? I mean, it's not the crime, it's the cover up, right? I mean, and it is, right? you commit a sin, and then you feel that you need to cover up that sin, so you commit a whole bunch of other sin, right? I mean, and how many times, and I don't know, maybe this is just in true crime documentaries on TV, right? But you know, murders are the result of a lesser crime, right? And then the person wants to cover up the lesser crime, and in order to cover up the lesser crime, they commit a murder, right? Or they embezzle a small amount of money from their workplace because they have this sure thing bet, and then they lose it, right? And so, I mean, so right, so I mean, sins do bring in their wake other sins. Um, and the reverse is also true. Okay. Um, so let's look at Mishnah 11. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Ha'osei mitzvah echad koneh lo paraklit echad. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov used to say, a person who performs one mitzvah acquires for himself um, one advocate. Okay, and this word that they translate as advocate, um, meaning advocate in the sense of lawyer. I mean, and that is that word paraclete is used in modern Hebrew to represent a, 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 a lawyer. I mean, particularly like um, lawyers who represent the government, right? They're called a paraclete. I believe that's a Greek loan word. In fact, I know it is because it also is. It occurs in Catholic theology, the identical word paraclete. But so if you fulfill a mitzvah, you have acquired for yourself um, an advocate, right? The mitzvah is your advocate. Ve'ha'over avera echad koneh lo kategor echad, right? And a person who commits one sin, one transgression, has acquired for himself a prosecutor, right? The word kategor, which is also a Greek loan word, means prosecutor. And it still means prosecutor in modern Hebrew as well. Okay, so any Israeli reading this would know, even though these are Greek loan words, any Israeli would know what a paraclete and a kategor is. A kategor is a paraclete is a it's not exactly a defense lawyer. That's more a sanegor, but a cutting advocate and a categor is a prosecutor, right? So if you commit a transgression, you have acquired for yourself a prosecutor. Um, Tshuva umaasim tovim katris bifnei haporanut, but repentance and good deeds serve as a shield against punishment. And Rabbi Yochanan Hasandlar, okay, Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar means sandal maker. Okay, so talking about how people had, how rabbis had other jobs or other occupations besides being a rabbi. So there was a rabbi in the Mishnah, Yochanan Hasandlar, which because sandal means sandal in Hebrew. And I'm not sure if we say sandal in English from the Hebrew or whether it's also a Greek loan word, or I don't know. But it is, I mean, sandal is sandal in Hebrew and sandlar is sandal maker. And it's not just like, modern Hebrew like radio or televisia or bira or whiskey. Um, this is good Mishnaic Hebrew. Um, but Rabbi Yochanan the Sandlar says, Kol Knesiyah Shehi L'Shem Shemaim, any assembly which is for the sake of heaven, Sofa L'Hit Kayem, will continue to endure. V'she'ena l'shem shamayim ein sofa l'hitkayem. An assembly that is not for the sake of heaven will not continue to endure. Okay. Questions or comments on this? I find that word kinesiah kind of interesting. Because I mean, it clearly does mean assembly, right? Likanes is to gather, and the Hebrew word for synagogue is Beit Knesset, right? And the Parliament of Israel is the Knesset, right? And Knessia comes from the same root, but in modern Hebrew, Knessia actually means church. So, like if I said before, that any Israeli reading this would recognize the words paraclete and kategor, because they mean the same thing in modern Hebrew, but then they would get to this sentence and they'd see what? Every church because but it obviously doesn't mean church here. Now, again, I mean, it does. Ecclesia is, the Greek word for church, which also means gathering. But anyway, I just find it interesting. But any gathering, so if it's for the sake of heaven, meaning for a good or righteous cause, then it will endure, and if it's not for a righteous cause, um, it won't endure. I guess they didn't know about demographics and neighborhood change and things like that. But because I'm not sure that the endurance or non-endurance is actually a reflection of the merits of a particular gathering contemporaneously, but maybe back then more so. Okay. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, Omer, Rabbi Elazar, son of Shemua, said, Yehi chvod talmidcha haviv alecha kishelcha. Let the honor of your student be as dear to you as your own honor. Uchvod havercha kamora rabcha, and the honor of your colleague be as dear to you as the honor or the reverence for your teacher. Umara rabcha kamora shemayim, and the honor of your teacher as the honor or the reverence for your teacher be for the reverence of heaven. Okay, so right, in other words, I'm I'm reading this as like treat the other like a step higher than the hierarchy would dictate, right? Because, right, if right, I mean, if I'm right, a teacher, and here student meaning disciples, right? So um, I'm on a higher rung than my disciples, right? But I treat my disciples as if they're on the same rung as me, right? And then my colleague is on the same rung as me, right? But um, but I don't treat them like me. I treat them as if they were my teacher, right? So there's me, and I've got my disciples, they're a rung below me, and I've got my mentor, and they're a rung higher than me, right? But and my colleague is on the same rung as me, but I treat my colleague as if they were my teacher, so like a rung higher than they are entitled to. And then my mentor, I treat with the same reverence as I treat God. So again, a step higher. And that's, I think, just short. So that would not, I mean, other than the fact that we're talking about disciples and mentors, um, I would not say that this is, particularly or necessarily aimed at rabbis, right? I mean, it could be aimed at anyone, right? And it's probably a good idea, right? To treat others not with the respect that they deserve, but with um, more respect than they actually deserve. And you'll always, I think that will work well for you. Um, all right. I'm gonna go. I mean, it's 9 o'clock, but I'm gonna go on, especially since you know I had pointed out that rabbis and Kohanim were not, the same. Were um, Rabbi Yehuda says, "Have Zahir b'Talmud shigagat Talmud ola zado." Okay, Rabbi Yehuda says, "Be careful in study, for an error in study counts as deliberate sin." And now here, by saying study, I mean this is also like studying in order to teach, right? So that right, so like to use the analogy that we've been working with a lot tonight, right? That if I am a judge, or frankly, if I'm a lawyer, right, I have to be very, very careful in my study of the relevant law, right? I mean, you know, Alan, you file a brief on behalf of one of your clients, and it's full of errors because you have been sloppy in your preparation. Um, that's not going to work out well for your client, right? And if you are a judge and you have read the law wrong, or misunderstood it or misinterpreted, that's not going to work out well, at least for one of the litigants. I mean, it may work out very well for the other litigant, but I mean, we're not talking about minor stuff here, right? We're talking about things where errors can have like really, really, really serious consequences.
Rabbi, you're right, and that really helps me to understand what they're saying here. But they're saying an inadvertent error. Now, an inadvertent error, to be fair, should not be one where you just you put together a brief and you filed it, or you used AI and you filed it, knowing AI has their problems. But you studied it, you worked on it, and it's determined to be wrong. Or in an appeals court says, all right, that's an error. That should not, in my opinion, and we're probably talking orange and apples, but that should not be the same as a deliberate sin. Your point that you need to really pay attention is well taken, but your job is to come up with the best and most persuasive argument that you can, staying within the boundaries of truth
Right, but I know we're look, I think there is a difference between a good faith error
right.
versus an error that results from intellectual laziness or failure to devote sufficient time. Right? That's the difference, right? I mean, if and I mean, right, and that's why, look, and I don't know how this like actually works, but I know that, a grounds for appeal is right, is ineffective assistance of counsel. Right? I mean, I don't know if people ever actually win appeals on that basis. I know they make them on that basis, right? But there's a difference. Like, if you make an argument that is a good faith argument based on, knowledge of the statutes, knowledge of the precedents, and you just make an argument that the court finds unpersuasive, that's one thing. If you make an argument that the court finds unpersuasive because you didn't know half the relevant precedents, or it's just some kind of crazy crackpot thing, then that could, I guess, be malpractice, right? I mean, so there's a there's a difference, right? And I mean, the thing is that, right, and this is what we saw 2 weeks ago when it said that you're better off not serving as a judge, because by serving as a judge you could come to commit theft, right? And you say, how is that possible? Well, because you ruled in favor of the wrong litigant, right? And therefore, the victorious litigant came into possession of things that by rights he should not come into possession of, and conversely, you are complicit in theft from the losing litigant, right? So that's I think what they're saying. They're like, people make mistakes, but there's a difference between a mistake that's just, you just legitimately made a mistake versus a mistake that's, due to, sloppy preparation, sloppy study. Okay. So this is what I wanted to get to. And we'll do this, we'll stop, and then I'm going to wind up picking up with this in 2 weeks. Rabbi Shimon Omer Shlosha Kitarim. Rabbi Shimon says there are three crowns. Keter Torah, v'Keter Kehuna, v'Keter Malchut. Right, there are three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. V'Keter Shem Tov Ola al Gabehem, but the crown of a good name supersedes them all. Okay, now, and here, and I probably would have been better off not in retrospect, not going this far. Okay, but I mean, there is a classical Jewish political theory. Okay, and in classical Jewish political theory, we don't have separation of church and state, but we do have separation of powers. Okay, there is the crown of Torah, meaning what is the crown of Torah? That rabbis. Okay, and the crown of priesthood, that's the Kohanim, right? And so and they are both, and then the third, the Keter Kahuna, is civil authority. Okay, and the three crowns are not supposed to mix. Okay, the civil authority should not hold religious authority. The religious authority should not hold civil authority. They're all subject to the same law. No, this is I mean, this is the classical Jew, and they're like volumes and volumes written on this. Okay. What's interesting is that so the Keter Torah and the Keter Kahuna, they're both channels of communication between the divine and the human. But just like, I mean, if you do a speed check on your computer, on your internet, right, you get an upload speed and a download speed, right? Because they're two different channels, right? The Keter Torah, that's the download. Okay, the rabbis mediate God's word to the people. The Keter Kahuna, the priesthood, that's the upload. They bring the people's word to God, right? Because that's the role of sacrifice, and they're separate. They're separate functions, right? And this is another reason another way that the contemporary rabbinate does not function in the same model, right? Because rabbis have become religious officiants. That's kahuna. That's not right. We very rarely are called upon to bring God's word to the people. We're called to bring the people's word to God, right? When somebody calls me up and says, Rabbi, my brother-in-law is sick, pray for him. I mean, I'll do it, but A, that's not a classic rabbinic function. And B, I do not in any sense believe that God is going to listen to my prayer any more than he's going to listen to your prayer, right? But if I say, you pray for your brother-in-law, you know him. I don't know. That's why we pay you. We pay, right? I mean, so it's a totally, we function as Kohanim, essentially. we don't really function as rabbis in the classical sense. I mean, it also has to do with the fact that, we have expertise in a legal system that our constituents do not by and large follow. Um, but the point is that there are, and anyway, so there is classically this separation of powers, and it goes way back. I mean, like there is a real ambivalence in rabbinic sources about Hanukkah, a real ambivalence. And the ambivalence, I mean, is twofold. One is that we don't want to be encouraging people to engage in military rebellion against an empire that is going to crush us. But the other is because the Hasmoneans were Kohanim, but they made themselves also the civil rulers, right? Which means they ignored the separation of powers. They aggregated to themselves two out of the three crowns, which should not be done. So this is not like, I mean, like there's been a lot, within the last 40, 50 years. Daniel Elazar, who taught at Temple University, has written the most about the Jewish political system and separation of power. Michael Walzer has also written a lot about it. But it goes way, way back, this idea of separation of powers. I mean, it's something that, most Jews don't really know about. In fact, even a lot of rabbis don't know about it. Anyway, questions, comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a phrase from the one that from Eliezer Ben Yaakov, where he refers to repentance and good deeds as a defense against or shield against punishment.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds very similar to what we do at the formula we use at High Holidays, except you left out tefillah. But I don't know if there's a connection there, if you think that the High Holiday liturgy builds on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that look, some of the like more obscure rabbis in the Mishnah, like I have no idea who this Eliezer ben Yaakov is. Okay. If he lived while the temple still stood, then he would not have mentioned tefillah, because that wouldn't have been like a primary mode while the temple still stood. It's only later that became the prime. But otherwise, you're absolutely correct, right? And that I suspect, and it happens a lot, that the Mishnah is describing a reality as it existed while the temple stood. And then subsequent, either the Talmud will change it, sometimes the Talmud will change it, and sometimes literature that's later than that, right? I mean, if you look, for example, since we're coming up on Pesach, right? The four questions in the Mishnah are not the same as the four questions in the Haggadah. Okay, and the Talmud has difficulty is trying to figure out like what the heck is going on here, right? Why? Because the fourth question in the Mishnah is on all other nights we eat meat boiled, roasted, or baked. Why on this night do we eat only roasted meat? Okay. Why? Because what is that reflecting? That is reflecting the fact that what you are eating on the first night of Pesach is what? Is the Paschal lamb, which is roasted over an open fire, right? But by the time of the Haggadah, it's like that question doesn't make any sense because, like, not only are we not only eating roasted meat, we aren't eating roasted meat at all, right? Because the practice has grown up not to eat roasted meat lest it somehow appear that you are like conducting illicit sacrifices in the absence of a temple, right? So, but yeah, but right, but yes, it is the same formula as appears in Unatana Tokef with the addition of tefillah, and I suspect that I don't know this for a fact, but I would suspect that the Mishnah is reflecting a pre-destruction reality, while the Unatana Tokef and the Unatana we know is late, is very late actually. It's clearly a post-destruction reality. All right. Okay. Night, folks. Thank you very much.
Good night, Rabbi. Thank you.
Night. Thanks.